Thank you for taking your seats. I hope you've all got a cup of coffee or tea in your hand and that you've had some breakfast. And we'll start the proceedings. I'd like to invite at the outset Ms. Ruchika Singh and Mr. Anirban Ghosh to please join me on stage. Anirban, if you could also escort Mr. A.N. Jha. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Restore 2025, Accelerating India's Restoration Economy for a Harit Bharat. On behalf of WRI India, the India Climate Collaborative, and Transform Rural India, it is a pleasure to open this important day. India stands at a moment of extraordinary opportunity. Our forests, farms, grasslands, and wetlands are deeply interconnected systems, the backbone of our food security, water security, rural livelihoods, and climate resilience. Together, they support nearly 700 million people. We have one of the world's largest opportunities to grow nature, grow livelihoods, and grow resilience at the same time. This is the heart of the restoration economy, where ecological restoration strengthens rural prosperity, reduces climate risks, and supports agriculture, activates new markets. Evidence shows that every $1 invested in restoration generates $7 to $30 in benefits. Across India, we are already seeing this in action through agroforestry, bamboo enterprises, NTFP markets, watershed work, and digital planning tools. Before we begin, a quick overview of this morning's program. We'll have opening remarks by Dr. Ruchika Singh and Anirban Ghosh. We'll have the keynote address by Mr. Ajay Narayan Jha. We will be launching two very critical documents, as well as the exhibition that you see behind you. We'll also have two very action-packed panel discussions during the day, two very, very fiery fireside chats, and of course, a special address by the Honorable Minister of Jharkhand. And following that, we will invite you to join us for tea. With that, it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Ruchika Singh for the first opening remarks. Ruchika?
Good morning, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to Reset 2025. This is the first time WRI India, TRI, and ICC are organizing these national conversations on restoration. Very critical. The reason why, as a partners, we came together was because India has a huge opportunity for restoration, but how do we think through in terms of, we know there are a lot of barriers and challenges, and as partners, how we can sort of, leveraging our strengths, come together to really unlock the huge potential that India has for land restoration, but also for building a restoration economy, and that's where we're coming from. I'd like to also welcome all of you on behalf of India Climate Collaborative. Unfortunately, colleagues could not join this morning because of some health reasons, but they will be there later in the day. Just to sort of kickstart this a bit, and the slides are not moving, we know that there's the stark realities of planetary degradation. There's rising inequality, which is locking people out of economic prosperity. Nature is being pushed to its limit. The climate is destabilizing. We've all seen impacts of climate change, and we face it day to day nowadays. And we've already sort of, surpassed the 1.5 degree limit. And a lot of the impacts of climate change are disproportionately felt by poorer, marginalized communities, women, and also by different sections, of urban or rural population. So how do we think about planning for restoration? How do we think about addressing some of these? Also is about thinking about, the land sector overall. And that's where we know from the evidence globally, IPCC has talked about it a lot. The land sector provides 1/3 of the climate mitigation potential, and also for adaptation. So how we think about, people in the Indian context, small marginal landholders, given this interrelated context becomes very critical. And that's where there is a need and opportunity to really restore productivity to our landscapes. How do we do that is very, very critical. Just to kind of show you, where we are today. There's a lot of focus, of course, on food production with the growing population that India has. There are already sort of, lot of celebrated cases of agroforestry that's already happening, but we have a lot of degraded land. And of course, we have a lot of, areas which are under conservation, whether these are open natural ecosystems or forests. However, if we really want to think about, celebrating nature for multiple sort of opportunities, ecosystem services it provides, whether it's water, whether it's biodiversity, in terms of improved air quality, etc. We really need to think about a completely different vision where we continue to intensify food production, and there's a lot that's already happening in India in that context in terms of crop diversification, more climate-friendly agriculture, but also restoring some of the marginal unproductive lands into agriculture, where sometimes because of lack of irrigation facilities, for instance, second cropping doesn't happen. A potential to create those into agroforestry areas, but also sort of protect and restore into conservation, whether it's through grassland restoration, protecting our commons and restoring our commons, mixed use systems. But obviously, the overall larger focus is also on no change in land use that needs to happen. And India has a huge opportunity to do that. This is from an article from Nature that came out in 2020, and India emerges as a priority area for restoration, specifically thinking from a biodiversity perspective. That's what the authors looked at. From a climate perspective, and also an area where in terms of if we think about cost of doing it, the costs are lower. But if you think about the benefits, they're quite high, especially with the, how the rural communities can be also benefit from this if we start to think and plan and do it right. And that's where sort of, thinking through of a landscape approach. How do we think about conservation and developmental priorities together? The trade-offs that may be there in a landscape becomes critical, which essentially is about, thinking through in terms of the right place, right use, right species. What are the areas that should be prioritized, for instance, for protection, grassland restoration? What are the ecosystem service benefits, for instance, that can come from, let's say, we are doing restoration? What are the economic opportunities if it, is in terms of recreation, ecotourism, or sustainable agriculture? And we've done a lot of work sort of in terms of thinking through on how landscape planning, etc., could happen, which could help in doing that. And considering the landscape principles, thinking about these trade-offs while sort of implementation is very, very critical. Most recently at the COP 30 as well, some of these sort of issues came up. A recent report by FAO and partners actually emphasized at COP how the interlinked benefits of forest and tree cover, also for strengthening agricultural productivity and resilience. And again, sort of thinking through in terms of the interlinked approaches, landscape approaches, how it can help in building climate resilience, but also food security. At COP30, also the forest facility was launched, Tropical Forest Forever facility, which Brazil sort of spearheaded. India has joined as an observer. There's a lot in terms of climate financing, for instance, that can come. But when we sort of think about all of those things, one of the questions specifically in the Indian context as well that sort of is critical to sort of emphasize is that restoration looks very different in different places, depending on the land use and ownership, whether it's about riparian restoration, agroforestry, watershed management, and how we think about some of these different interventions, which are always hyperlocal efforts. So restoration is always hyperlocal, but the principles are something that's which can be sort of scaled. And we would have a lot more conversations around some of this later in the day today as well as tomorrow. But overall, I mean, I think there is enough evidence globally, but also in the Indian context, that if we sort of invest in nature, it can really help in sort of developing economies which can thrive. It is really an era where we can think about a new restoration economy. But what would that mean? What would that look like? And that's where sort of, it's really a sort of need for government, businesses, communities to invest in sort of coming together for nature, and it can help in creating a lot of different jobs and livelihoods, which can help in sort of, flowing of multiple ecosystem services. But what do these sort of new restoration jobs or models could look like? We have an exhibition, and you'll see a lot of that, what a lot of restoration champions are already spearheading. But there are different sort of innovative business models that are already in place. For instance, creating value chains through restoration-based products, whether, on custard apples, around bamboo, around sustainable agriculture value chains, nursery management. There are different kind of jobs that can be created, landscape architects, how do we think about sort of, monitoring, etc. So there's a lot that's already going on, but if the restoration economy needs to develop, what we really we need to sort of think through also is, what are those stages? It's a bit of an innovation. A lot of innovation is already happening, but it's also charting into that unfamiliar territory. So how do we sort of look at unfamiliar and also look at familiar and, think about how the industry itself could be developed? Because there's fragmented innovation that's already happening. A lot of research and development we are seeing in the sector. There are a lot of innovation and individual projects, but pioneering models. But for the industry to develop, what is needed is a marketplace. Is there enabling infrastructure, for instance, in place? Is there financial intermediation? Is there absorptive capacity for businesses actually to do that? How do we sort of, from the finance side, from the sort of government incentive side, how is some of that coming together? And of course, for a restoration economy to spur, the larger question also is it a mainstream sort of, ecosystem, and it's already been talked about? Has it reached that maturity? Is public policy really valuing nature? Is market rewarding outcomes, which would mean that businesses have that patient capital. They are getting investments for doing that, and that's where a new restoration economy can be spurred. And how are businesses accounting for nature in the work that they are already doing? And all of this is critical. Which is what, are the key tenets in a way of a restoration economy, and which we are all as partners also thriving towards. How do we create that enabling ecosystem? How do we think about the right kind of data, the right kind of capital, how facilitating that capital, how do we think about capacity building needs, monitoring and evaluation? I know this graphic is very hard to read, but it was more to give a sense of there's a lot that needs to be done, a lot of innovation is already happening, and how do we do that together? And all of this needs finance. There is what data indicates, globally there is a finance gap. This is from the UNEP report that came out last year. Globally, there's a shortfall of USD 215 billion annually. A lot of investments, if we look at restoration, are coming from the public funding, and about a bit from the private funding. But a lot more needs to be done. Asia and Middle East actually are the sectors, regions where there's a lot more investments needed on this, as per the report as well. So a lot needs to be done. The good news is India is already doing it. There's a lot of public funding that's available for restoration. We're all, and this is slightly dated data, but where we looked at all the big public funding investments that are happening on restoration, from Manrega to Campa to Finance Commission recommendations, and a lot of those allocations indicate that there was almost 13 billion, that was being allocated between 2011 and 16 for protecting and improving forest and tree cover. Those investments, of course, have increased, which is a sign that there is investments, but we need also more private sector investments into the sector so that we can really unlock the benefits of a restoration economy, whether it's about improving jobs and rural livelihoods, enhancing food and nutritional security, building community resilience or agricultural productivity. And these are all sort of topics which we will discuss at Restore 2025 with a lot more focus, as Jaskiran was talking about in terms of investments, the role of CSR, catalytic philanthropy, how is Niti Aayog, for instance, looking at it, what are the models that are emerging from different sort of sectors. And yeah, we're looking forward to 2 days of these conversations with all of you, and I'll pass it back to you, Jaskiran. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruchika. I think you've really grounded the days in science, policy, and sort of community dimensions for India's restoration pathway. I think it's critical for people who've been working in the development sector to really appreciate what it takes to start looking at strategic points of intervention, and finance being one. So our 2 days are actually quite full of finance discussions, investment discussions, CSR, ESG, just mobilizing everything that we possibly can for a restoration economy. And with that, I'd love to invite Mr. Anirban Ghosh, co-founder and co-lead of Transform Rural India, to share his opening reflections. Anirban?
Welcome everybody to this important conversation which we are triggering for the next 2 days. Now, Ruchika placed the overall framing under which we are looking at the restoration economy and our efforts under the Harit Bharat initiative. Now, for several people in the room, I met people as people were coming in, this whole business of restoration is nothing new. In India, I joined the sector about 30 years back. And then at least another 15 years before me, the work on watersheds, work on land and water engagements had been happening. Already, the large programs which KFW, GTZ had invested, water was engaged in Aurangabad area. There were lots of engagement which were been happening in India over 40 years, 45 years. So what's new? And there have been, if you look at, historically, there have been several initiatives, including government initiatives like the IWMP, the massive investments which went into the watershed development programs. Several of us have worked on those programs in multiple states. And eventually it led to the creation of the Rain-Fed Authority under the Ministry of Rural Development. So the point is, what is new? What are we discussing new? So what my own reflection of what is new is which Ruchika very briefly showed, the restoration potential which is there in India, and WRI has created a far more detailed map for India itself and the restoration potential which is there in multiple states. Now, if you look at that potential, and if we see what we have achieved in the last 40 years, there is a massive gap between the potential, and despite the technical knowledge, I still remember, Tiedeman's Blue Book. So it was almost like a Bible when we started our development journey. So the technical knowledge is there, the community engagement processes, the knowledge and the processes around that is there. So knockdown pieces, if we see all that is required for kickstarting a restoration economy exists in India for decades. However, the gap between what we have achieved and the potential which is there in the country is massive. So the Harit Bharat initiative at some manner is attempting to accelerate this whole effort. And what is new? So two things I think is new which we are attempting to do. The first engagement is that right now in multiple states at Government of India level and also in multiple states, there is a greater interest, awareness and intent in terms of taking this whole initiative faster and at a larger scale. In the last 2 years of our 2.5 years of our joint engagement, we have seen several such initiatives, in states. In Chhattisgarh, there has been the More Gaon, More Pani initiative, which has been launched. Already 32,000 structures were taken up in the first year, and this year a much larger program is planned. Almost 342 billion liters of water is getting saved through the different interventions which are happening there. Already about 750, 800 odd crores have been invested, and this year possibly more than 1,000 crores will be invested. Similarly, in Jharkhand, there is this program which is a flagship program called the Birsa Harit Gram Yojana, which has reached more than 1.6 lakh acres of land restored in terms of horticulture plantations, which have been taken up. Similarly, there's a large initiative being planned in Maharashtra around the bamboo restoration work. There's a very large ADB program which the government of Maharashtra is bringing into the state for. So there are, and if we deep dive, people are actually looking at even deeper pathways. For example, government of Chhattisgarh is engaged and TRI is deeply engaged in the process of creating a green economic transition effort. There's a whole mission which is being thought in terms of identifying and accelerating green value chains. So there are some 14 odd green value chains where 17 departments have come together to look at how they would accelerate and create impact at the grassroots. So my point which I am making is there is a greater interest of the public systems in looking at and accelerating pathways around that. So Harit Bharat attempts to engage formally with the government ecosystem, the public ecosystem at multiple levels to scale up these programs. And in the last 2 years, we have been able to restore 52,000 hectares of land, working very closely with the public ecosystem and with several partners on the ground. The second piece of the engagement, so this is one, and this is something we are very, very focused and intent that how can civil society, not-for-profit initiatives work very closely with the public ecosystem to scale up the entire initiative across the, the states where there is very significant restoration potential. The second piece of engagement which one is looking at is typically watersheds have looked at 500 hectares, 1,000 hectares, and basically small landscape restoration based engagement. So the question is, what is the processes for large regional, bioregional, engagement around multiple actors coming together and looking at an entire bioregion. So for example, in Harit Bharat, we have been looking at Madhya Pradesh, Nimar region, and looking at how do we craft a multi-actor engagement in Nimar to take restoration at scale across the multiple districts and blocks in the area. Similarly, one is looking at different bioregions, and TRI with WRI, we are looking at about 15 to 16 such sub-regions in these focus areas where we would like to trigger multi-actor engagement for very large-scale restoration. So these are some of the new ideas, and in the exhibition behind, you would be able to see some of the early initiatives, but lot more has to be done. And that's where this whole idea of bringing together actors on the ground, policymakers, private sector engagement. We have Prabhakaranji from ITC here, and there will be several other private sector people who would be joining this whole initiative to craft out what can the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar do together to accelerate this process, and in the next 5 to 7 years, we create a very significant impact in the country. Thank you and welcome again on behalf of WRI, TRI, and the ICC.
Thank you, Anirban, for highlighting how restoration becomes truly transformational. I think your journey of the past 30 years, the kind of things that you've been seeing for the past 40, in fact, when communities lead and institutions support them, that can lead to really transformational change. So thank you for that. And now it is my privilege to invite and welcome Mr. Ajay Narayan Jha, one of India's most respected voices in public finance, climate budgeting, and environmental governance. His leadership, including reforms that strengthened CAMPA, the integration of natural capital into fiscal frameworks, and guidance through the finance commissions, has shaped India's modern ecological finance architecture. So we're honored that you can join us for the keynote address.
Very good morning to all of you. My colleagues on the desk, Dr. Ruchika Singh and Anirban Ghosh, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. I must thank WRI for having invited me for this inaugural session today of the two-day workshop. I must admit that I was a bit surprised when Dr. Ruchika Singh called me up to come and deliver this keynote address because, in a sense, I have been removed from the business of managing restorations, quote unquote, for a while now. But yes, public finance has been something I have been involved with very closely over the last several years, and she says that the focus of my conversation today with you should be on financing rural futures through landscape restoration. It's a very formidable subject, rural futures. That means we are looking into the future, sustainability, and how we are able to finance that. So please pardon me if you find that my address to you, my conversation with you is not very profound or does not bring in very many newer insights into what would be the questions which would be bothering you. Time permitting, maybe we can do a couple of questions, Q&A type of thing, if it's possible. So I leave that to the organizers. We saw in the recent COP at Belém that at the end of the day, everything came to finances. That how do you finance the developing countries, particularly of their needs to manage climate change, and all conversations ultimately got stuck around that, with some minor compromises being made on the extent of adaptation finance. The numbers which were agreed to for the annual support from the developed world to the developing world is just a little over what they have estimated for the world to spend on just one aspect of managing adaptation, which is restoration. So $215 billion, whereas annually the requirement is $300 billion for the support which the developed world has guaranteed to the developing countries. So that is the extent of problems which we face in terms of financial architecture, in terms of the financial requirements that are available for us. There are three things which I want to emphasize here in the context of India. And these are, number one, any plan which we devise and the implementation strategy around it requires affordable and adequate finance. Affordable is important because we often tend to have very grandiose plans which cannot be supported through the available channels of financing available. And they end, with partial or no success at all at the end of the day. I'll cite you an example of a very ambitious program which was taken up, as Anirban mentioned, about 30 years back, and which didn't really meet up to any of the expectations which the government had. The second thing which is very critical when we look at finance is how much of an integrated view can we take of the subject and of our requirements. Can we bring convergence in our design of the program, in planning and implementation strategies? Convergence from where? You have several sources of finance available, whether it's the central government schemes or central government programs. You have state government programs. Few examples were cited of very proactive state governments in this area of work. We have private sector initiatives now. We have CSR initiatives in a fairly big way across several states and several industries. So how much of that can be integrated in our approach to planning and implementation? The third and the most critical in my view is the willingness to act along with the solutions to act upon and suitable systems for delivery. There has to be a willingness, buy-in by the let us say, in the case of India, very typically, the buy-in has to be at the political level, at the government level, because they are the ones to whom people look at for various types of support and assistance. And how much of a buy-in is there in that? There's a paper in NIPFP, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, which was prepared about 2 years back. This was just before this, I think, COP at Glasgow, 23, where an estimation was made of India's investment in what I can say broadly adaptation-related expenses. And we calculated that almost 4.5 to 6.5% of GDP was being spent, which amounts to roughly 5 to 6 lakh crores on an average, on various elements of adaptation-related programs covering broad sectors like agriculture, forestry, Ayush, medicinal plants could be there, irrigation. You have the Sichai Yojana, different types of irrigation, minor irrigation, micro irrigation projects are there. So all of them clubbed together, it amounted to a fairly significant sum of money at the central level. If I add in the state level expenses, it will increase by another 35 to 40%. So in that sense, there is no shortage of money. In my view, there is no shortage of money in the government sector. The challenge is, how do you bring the willingness to act and the convergence of different players in the field to use this money for the most productive use that can be possible. One of the problems which, despite this large sum of money being available, is the unpredictability of the numbers which is available from the government side. I did a very quick analysis, back of the envelope calculation, you can say, of the mission on natural farming, national mission on natural farming. It sort of fits the objectives of this program, fits with what you broadly define as a landscape approach, going back to nature and using different natural techniques, not only for restoration of the soil, but also for planting alternate crops. And the variations are stark. The first year of the program, the budget was in crores, if I can say, 30 crores. The second year, the budget estimates were 365 crores, 10 times more than what was provided in the first year. But the actual expenditure was only 1/3, that's 100 crores. Now again, it has been scaled up this year to 600 crores. Now, you can't have such wide fluctuation and unpredictability about the sums of money which is being made available. I'm not surprised, therefore, that a lot of the programs which were being talked about are hedged onto Manrega. Because it seems Manrega is the only program where there is some flow of money which is going to the rural areas, which is sad. Because Manrega has multiple objectives and it is completely dependent on the buy-in from the government and the functionaries who are there in that state for their programs to be channelized into restoration business. So you have to be careful in choosing and designing programs. As Mr. Anirban mentioned, it's designing programs for restoration is not something new in this country. It has been in existence even before I joined service, which was in the decade starting in the 80s. So it predates. So wasteland development, drought area program, arid development programs, excuse me, arid areas development programs. These are all something which have, okay, yeah, I am almost coming to the end. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's okay, it's okay. Yeah, that's the other point. I'll just come to that. So, in 1989, a flagship scheme called Integrated Wasteland Development Program was launched with much fanfare. And I think in a year or two, they had the guidelines. It underwent a renaming in 2003. It was called Hariyali. But there's a CAG report which I came across of 2013, which is after 10 years of the scheme, and they say that the target was modest 32,000 hectares, which they achieved over 9 years. Whereas the scale of wastelands was almost 187 lakh hectares in the country. So I don't know what fraction 32,000 would be of 1,87,000 hectares of land. So, I mean, that is the type of gulf we have between programs which have been conceived with good intentions and their implementation. And it's not that money has been lacking. What it brings me to is that we need better programs with greater flexibility to take care of the local requirements, adaptability to the diversities in this country. This country is huge. We have a lot of diversity. Even within a state, you have such diversity you cannot imagine. You go from, in Maharashtra, from eastern Maharashtra to western Maharashtra, and the entire landscape, people, everything changes. Same with UP, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh. All of these areas have wide diversities. We should recognize them. And the last point I wanted to make is that in our effort to have focus on restoration of landscape, we should not forget two other restoration needs of this country. One is water. We have neglected water. We have not taken care of our wetlands. We have not taken care of our river systems, watersheds. These need active participation and effort by the civil society and government and the sectors like WRI, TRI, etc., to focus on restoration of these landscapes. And finally, air, about which the less said the better, given what we face in Delhi over the 3 months or 4 months of winter. So this is again, the air quality generally in India, especially of urban landscapes, is something which requires urgent restoration and care. So I end here. I can take questions. I'm told, so if there are issues, I'm told there are issues relating to certain interest about sources of financing other than government, etc. I'm willing to take that.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Keynote addresses are those where we have dignitaries come in and speak about a topic, but for the first time, I think I'm seeing somebody who would want to interact with the audience, and I can tell that they also want to ask you some questions. So we'll open the floor for 1 or 2 questions. If you could raise your hands, my colleagues will come and ask you to please introduce yourself, and then a short question.
Thank you very much for a very bright speech. And the point stuck with me was that at the end of all these efforts of climate change and agriculture restoration, funding and finance becomes the deducted thing. Now you mentioned about COP30, and our Minister for Environment presented a report, and also the demand or the estimates for climate change required for India. Does it include the restoration of the agriculture land, including water and air, which you mentioned? That's the question.
See, as far as my understanding goes, the report I have seen does include restoration of wastelands, etc. It is part of adaptation. So the adaptation budget has this provision. Specifically how much, I don't know.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, then we can move on. Great. I hope that Mr. Jha will be available.
Just one remark I wanted to make. Somebody mentioned to me while having coffee about private finance for this type of work. My own understanding and is that it's very difficult to get private finance for typical restoration type of activity, unless it is tied to some economic activity in return. For example, if you're going in for plantations of fruit crops, horticulture, etc., yes, then in that case you can get private finance, but purely for land restoration, etc., it is not available. Agroforestry, yes, it is available, and there are agencies which have financed, refinanced through NABARD, where for agroforestry of certain kinds, they are giving financial support.
Thank you, Mr. Jha, for that very deeply insightful and meaningful conversation that you've kicked off. I think the restoration economy is what we'll be discussing throughout the course of the next 2 days. And one of the things is exactly what you said, what can be connected to a financial or investable model. That's what we need to really get down to create that thriving restoration economy. And with that, and thanking my speakers and taking cognizance of their time, we'd like to launch the Hindi edition of the Restoration Launchpad Guidebook. I'll request my colleagues to please bring copies of them upstairs to the dais. These will be made available also through our website. And if you'd like to see a copy or have one on hand, please let us know in advance. This is a practical step-by-step resource to support practitioners, community institutions, and local governments across India's restoration landscapes. We have a video that will be played once we've taken photographs and launched. Thank you. Please have a seat. Could we cue the video, please? Apologies, it's not an inaugural convening if we don't have at least some technical glitches. While we resort those, I'd like to invite my colleague Shweta Prajapati, our communications lead for WRI, to please join me on stage. We will be inaugurating the restoration exhibition featuring pioneering restoration champions and landscape efforts from Central India. I'd like to request our three speakers, Dr. Ruchika Singh, Mr. Anirban Ghosh, and Mr. A.N. Jha, to please join us at the back for the ribbon cutting, while my colleague Shweta actually tells us more about the restoration exhibition and the champions that have helped create this for us today.
A warm welcome to the exhibition inauguration. So I'm very excited to share with you that we have put together a lovely, inspiring exhibition with 12 restoration champions who are working on restoration-based solutions across different geographies in different states with different kind of community groups. I just would like to share a small insight that why this exhibition, while everyone is moving towards the exhibition space. So often when we speak about restoration or restoration economy, the question comes to our mind, what does it look like? It sounds a very abstract concept sometimes, but there is an actual action going on at the ground by a lot of people, a lot of innovative and I would say strong-headed people, because restoration is not easy. We are trying to create jobs, we are trying to create livelihoods while restoring our ecosystems. while also ensuring nutrition security for the people. So these restoration champions are a powerful reminder that whatever conversations we are going to have over next 2 days is for them, towards this restoration economy that we are creating together.